Hello, my name is Naomi Gale and I am a birth doula and a postnatal doula. I'm also a pelvic health specialist and work with women in general with all things pelvic health and coming back into their bodies. So what does a doula actually do? This is a question that comes up on Google and it's something that a lot of people ask, especially when you announce that you're a doula, when they ask you what you do. It's a really good question and there's so many layers to it. So I thought I'd get into some points as they flow. I've got no script as such. I just wanted to share a little bit more around what a doula actually does. So a doula is somebody who way back when would have been called a gossip. Doula is the word, originated from gossip. And basically what that meant was that back in the day, there would be like a group, like a gaggle, a group of people who would come together when a woman was giving birth in the community. So there would be some wise elders that would come together, friends, there would be neighbours, they would come into the space where the woman was giving birth, be in the room next to them in general, or within that space somewhere, be drinking wine and celebrating and honouring the woman as she steps over that threshold to become a mother. So that's where the term gossip came from and doula came from. Would then be there with the woman to tend to the woman, and maybe they would do the cooking and cleaning and caring for the other children. And this is where the whole coming into community space really existed and doesn't exist now. So doulas have been around for a long time. But doulas have been perhaps a little bit written out of the journey of childbirth, because what then happened was that eventually it was kind of lost along the way. There was the rise of intervention from the medical, and there was the rise of the partners, men being at the birth. So if you start eradicating what they deemed was the need for doulas, their more rounded, supportive, cheerleading, holistic approach, tend to perhaps potentially have gotten in the way of what the medical profession were trying to move towards, and then men were invited into birth, and so doulas became less and less part and parcel of the journey with birth. And that's why it feels now to be a very challenging topic of discussion around what a doula actually is and what a doula actually does in a society that essentially hasn't had doulas at birth for many an age. They've always been there, it's just not as prevalent as it used to be and not in the same context. So essentially what was essentially just part and parcel of being in a community is now something that you hire a doula, as opposed to it just being part and parcel of the community. So what a doula actually does depends on the doula. So that's why it's really important that anyone that's embarking on hiring a doula goes down the route of being with that doula and really being with the relationship that a couple within that space have with the doula. It's a very intimate space to be stepping into, so you really want to be with somebody who is your vibe essentially and really understands and gets exactly what you're about and exactly what you want for your birth and postnatal time. And if that isn't the case, then you can find other doulas. There are doulas, if you just Google doula and your location, there will be a doula that will come up. So it's giving you that time to explore local doulas. Now, when I say it depends on the doula, that's because some doulas come into this space a little bit like I have, which is where they've got experience in other areas of interest with maybe women's health or some kind of interesting background. Or sometimes someone's come into it just as a doula and hasn't had anything else to do with this kind of world before. What tends to happen, and I'll speak to it from my space and what I offer as a doula, or I call myself a birth keeper. Some people don't call themselves a doula, they call themselves a birth keeper, which is where there can be confusion, because if we don't even fully understand what a doula is doing, then when someone calls themselves a birth keeper, it can be quite challenging to understand what that means. So a birth keeper doula, they're essentially doing the same kind of thing. There isn't really a difference from what I gather in the space that I exist in. There just may be courses that someone might have done where they call themselves a birth keeper, or they might have done a doula course, but it's all essentially the same thing, and it's holding a woman during that transition into motherhood. So what I offer and what many doulas offer is an antenatal starting point. Lots of people do antenatal courses or classes or workshops. But essentially what I've noticed is that they're amazing and brilliant and have a wonderful space, and you don't have to do one, but you might do one. And especially second time parents, they don't tend to do antenatal classes for their birth. What that is a group focused space. So often what happens is that space has to have a gentle landing point. We're not going to go into the nitty gritty of everybody's like pre-existing birth experiences. We're not going to go into specifics around someone's birth plan. You know, that isn't part and parcel of that one-to-one space that exists within a doula space. And there also is some chat obviously around the hospital space or the midwife space that exists. But when you're with a doula, you can really have that real deep dive on what your expectations are for birth and for your place of birth. So antenatal classes or antenatal one-to-ones in a doula space do look very different, and they're very, very obviously, because it's one-to-one, tailored to you. And what I noticed is that what the antenatal classes can't cover are covered with a doula. And this is because we can't take into account everybody that's in that group. Like as an antenatal teacher, that's just not going to be able to be a possibility. And I noticed that, for example, when I've come with a client and they've asked, for example, to birth at the MLU, there can sometimes be a very almost green approach to it. We live in a society now where midwifery-led units, MLUs, the percentage rates of people actually giving birth in there are so low. So for example, in Thanet, where I'm based, in QEQM, the percentage is 4% of all births will land in the MLU and remain in the MLU, essentially, is what we're saying. Out of all births, that's incredibly low, and 2% home birth. And that's also because we have to understand what's going on within the system. We have to understand what's going on within each couple to be able to almost gatekeep that space. And that doesn't happen at antenatal classes, because what happens is the doula tends to sort of almost like take that role and take that step into a couple's space when the antenatal classes are coming to some level of closure, so that we can really gatekeep and support in those last weeks, which is the crucial weeks for when the intervention can come into play and cause a cascade, which is what is existing. And this is why doulas are on the rise, because the system is really challenging what it means to have a physiological efficient birth. We would love every woman to have an efficient physiological birth, and unfortunately the system is hell-bent on preventing that in order to essentially what they believe is save lives. But actually the stats of stillborn babies are just as they were and they ever were even before all this medical intervention was coming into play over the years. So they're not making birth any safer, but what they're doing is increasing the trauma for the woman and the baby at birth. And this is why the doulas are coming into this space, because there needs to be more space for a woman and a partner to discuss their fears and their needs going into birth, which can only happen on a one-to-one supportive level. I kind of see the doulas on like, what are they actually? It is very much at the beginning, very much like a coach. It's that coach vibe of like, okay, what is it that you want? What is your intentions for this? And how can we try and meet those intentions in a space that's hell-bent on not meeting those expectations that you have? So if you're somebody who's planning on a home birth, for example, and you're based here in Thanet, and they're saying that there's no midwives going out to home births, which is exactly what's happening. Literally in the last week, they were sending no midwives. What does that look like for a woman that wants to give birth? Or if you're a woman that wants to give birth in the MLU, and we're saying the 4% stat exists, and on top of that, they close it all the time, and you're going into birth and you don't want to be on a labour ward, what does that look like, and how are you going to be supported through that? And so essentially what a doula is doing is really supporting you with what it looks like to give birth in your space, in your town, in your local hospital, with this real earthy experience of what it means. And that is really, really key. They also will be there to share other interventions. They might bring things like homeopath staff, they might bring aromatherapy, they might bring massage touch, they might bring something like mindset prep. There might be all sorts that they can weave into that antenatal space and really be with what's arising at any given time. So those antenatal prep spaces are a space not only for real prep, but also a space to prep and really get into the vibe of what it's going to mean to be together in this, essentially this really beautiful navigation of this journey, of this rite of passage into motherhood. So that is the starting point. A doula would then support at birth, and that means that they're on call from however many weeks that they want to be on call for. It tends to be that when I have a client, I'm just on call. So if you need me, I'm right there. And the client will call when they are at a point that they feel ready to call the doula into their space. And the doula will arrive, and the real gift of a doula is actually sometimes they don't do that much within that birth space. Being there is enough. And that is what a woman is remembering. It's the remembrance of having other women support them. We have to be realistic. Men have never given birth, and they will never give birth. So they will never understand what it means to be in that space. And we're expecting them to do several jobs that were done by women back in the day to hold space for a woman going into birth. They are given the role of space holder for their partner, witnessing their partner go through this space, and sometimes end up with very handsy at times medical staff, and that's very harrowing at times, especially if it ends up in a cascade. They're expected to be the spokesperson, they're expected to be the decision maker, they're expected to be the one that remembers all the stuff to take with them if they're going to the MLU, for example. They're expected to be, potentially, if they have another child, to be able to be organising everything for the child, or if you have a dog, I mean, there's the expectations to organise everything, to be everything and everything, and to understand birth and understand what's going on and understand where they are in where the partner is in labour, and be able to hold all of that and not quibble. Then to come out the other side and be expected to just hold space for every part of what went on. It is not possible for a man to do this. And it is not possible, not just from a man's perspective, but from anybody's perspective. It's why the role of the doula is actually incredibly supported for the midwife. And that would be a whole other video on the support for and what they provide and where the difference is between a midwife and a doula. But that it's also incredibly, incredibly important for a partner to have this level of support, and then for the partner to feel like that they have got that level of support. Because oftentimes as the partner, you're looking to make sure that your partner is okay, both sides, and that is also a challenge and a responsibility within the space. What it does, and what a doula is doing, is supporting both parties in that, empowering the woman and empowering the partner to be able to be in that space and treat it as exactly what it is, which is a rite of passage. It is a passage into motherhood, and it is a journey that we have to go on to land on that feather bed of motherhood, from the maiden to the mother. And essentially that is being ripped from and taken from women galore because of a system that's hell-bent and continuously and from the beginning hell-bent on taking away the empowerment that a woman deserves, and knowing, an inner knowing of what a woman needs and wants and desires and deserves. Taken from the moment we start to bleed, taken from the moment we enter this world as a woman tends to be, but taken from, like, for example, being thrust the pill and being told that once you've gone on the pill, it's difficult to then get off the pill and then suddenly realise that you want to conceive, and how do I conceive, and what does that look like, and how many days is my cycle, and then expected to have conception, and then expected to go through pregnancy, and then be able to trust in the body to have a physiological efficient birth. It's the whole system is rigged to ensure that there is no empowerment that exists for women. And so what a doula does is land into the space, into that birthing space, and just remind you that you've got it. You've absolutely got it. And if there's any questions or anything that's needed within that space, then the doula is right there. And the doula sometimes sleeps when the woman and the partner sleeps. A doula may bring her knitting and or her crochet, make a cup of tea. She might be the middle person to support the midwife if they land in the space. If it's like for a home birth, for example. If it's a free birth, then they're there to support during that free birth in any ways and means that the woman needs that support. And oftentimes it's simply just being there. Just being there and reminding them that they've absolutely got the power within and that they've absolutely got it. And then what often happens is that the doula will remain in the space until they feel that there is like that closure point, that golden hour after birth, that they feel that that's a time that they are ready to leave the woman and the family to be in that space and that portal to the next 40 days. And so for me, on a personal level, I'm a postnatal doula. I don't end there. I tend to then, and I really only take on clients if they're willing for me to support them with their postpartum life, because for me, what's as important, if not more important, is the postpartum part. And a doula will be there. There's also like chef doulas, like cook doulas that cook the food that's like nourishing for a woman. What it means to me is to weave in this pelvic health awareness and just all my other tools, like my massage tools. I'm a massage therapist within the pelvis and with the womb. I work with nervous system led tools. And also I weave in all of that knowledge and beautiful wisdom that I come with as a result of being a twin mum and breastfeeding journeys and twin breastfeeding journeys, and I might come with like all my, just so many tools I come with. It's like my most passionate part is to be there postpartum, because we think that once we've birthed then that's it and that we, you know, go on home and crack on. And we do have midwifery and health visitor support, but unfortunately, because the system just doesn't have the time, we don't have enough time to spend on, for example, someone that's breastfeeding. And it's really interesting because the UK has one of the lowest stats for breastfeeding in the world, right? And where does that stem from? Well, it stems from the lack of support that exists within hospitals and within the midwifery space, because there isn't enough. First of all, there's not enough training on it. Second of all, there's not enough time to give the woman, and that's essentially all it needs, is time and experience to witness the woman in that space and support them with that breastfeeding journey. If that is something that they want, not every woman wants that, but tends to be that they want it and they just haven't had the support to continue on with it. And so the doula is right there to support them with that. I, for example, take nourishing foods to the woman and I just drop in. It's normally for me around like that 9 a.m. mark, when there's been the night and then we're ready to drop in that 9 a.m. and I land there and I bring the nourishing food for the women. I might bring like a bone broth, I might bring lactation cookies, a boning cake, like whatever it looks like for that nourishing postpartum period food. I would there and I would ensure that they are being in bed for predominantly the 2 weeks, initially the 2 weeks, supporting them with that, and then transitioning to like the rest of the house, like the sofa, and being there for 2 weeks, and just really gatekeeping that space that we exist in. And this is very much a cultural issue that we have, where we do not support the woman postpartum, as it tends to be that we celebrate the baby, we want to like adorn the baby with gifts and look at the baby and be with the baby and visit whenever we want to visit, and we encourage mums to just be there and almost present the baby. And I like to talk about that. It's similar to when we have and this has proved how challenging our society is with this postpartum, is that we were up in arms when we didn't see the baby come out in the royal arms after she'd just given birth, which was Harry's partner, and her name's literally just left my mind. But Kate Middleton, however, came out with the baby straight away, like everybody else has, and we were all like celebrating that, oh thank goodness, like we can see the baby and Kate's presenting the baby. But then when Harry's partner didn't do the same, up in arms, how dare she not, why should she? She's literally just given birth and landed into motherhood. Why should she? She should never. No one should ever expect anyone to do that. And the baby would still be there in a month's time, and she can present the baby in a month's time if that's what you want. But to honour this beautiful space of landing in a feather bed is exactly what we should be doing. And it looks like bed rest for any tears, bed rest for anything that needs to be tended to within the body, bed rest so that the breastfeeding can be established and there's not the smells of loads of visitors and perfume, and the baby gets to know the parents and the parents get to know the baby, and it's bed rest for both parents. And to be able to gatekeep and support with the boundaries of this, it needs someone like a third party member that's not family, that's not related, that's not a friend, that's just someone can be totally just in the middle of it all and supporting with that. And supporting with that the midwife visits and the health visitor visits, and just being that middle person, so that actually if the breastfeeding is being challenging, the doula can be there supporting with the breastfeeding and be able to support with all the questions that are coming up, so that when the health visitor comes in, most of their questions have been answered, and the health visitor can get into details that they need to be able to get into and be able to come with their tools and tricks. And it's just layers upon layers of supporting this transition, these initial 40 days, so that they feel like they can just springboard into the next part and the next journey. And that's what exists within a doula. That's what a doula is doing. To be able to facilitate that is an absolute gift. To be able to be there and facilitate that for a family, the relationship that you have is just second to none. And I've just closed literally today as I do this with a family, a beautiful first time family, and he said to me that he felt like I was his real life angel, which obviously was such a gift to hear, but it was simply to be able to be there and come in and remind them that they've got it. And that's what they just said. They said it's just that reminder that every time you came, it was the reminder and that reframing of what it means to land into this space of parenthood, because it's really hard to land in that space on major sleep deprivation, this challenge of having a child, and maybe even another child if you already have one, to be tending to both children or 3 children or however many you have, and to be expected to do it all and not to be reminded of this journey and that you're okay and that everything's okay. So to tend to the woman, to come in and remind her of that and facilitate her eating well and having a shower. And I never take the baby. I didn't hold the baby for this couple, for example. I remember him saying, but you haven't held the baby. I'm not here to hold the baby. I'm here to hold the woman. And that's what a doula does. And that's the gift of hiring a doula. Much love.